The wind cut sharp across the empty highway as Officer Keller's cruiser idled beside the rusted blue pickup. Its taillight cracked, exhaust whispering against the dusk. Inside sat John Mercer, hands steady on the wheel, his gaze forward, unmoved by the flashing red and blue. Keller approached with the confidence of a man who thought he knew every kind of trouble. The veteran's silence irritated him, a quiet defiance in the stillness. When John handed over his ID, worn and discolored, Keller scoffed, demanding clearer proof. John's voice, calm but firm, only fueled his pride. With a flick of contempt, Keller slammed the ID to the asphalt, its plastic casing splitting open as something metallic caught the last streak of sun. The glint stopped him cold. Embedded inside the ID was a small, circular medal, tarnished but unmistakable, the insignia of the Medal of Valor. The air between them shifted. Keller's chest tightened. For the first time, he saw not a suspect, but a man who'd once faced death for others' freedom, and now faced disrespect from one meant to serve him. The silence hung like a reprimand. Keller's pulse drummed in his ears as he picked up the cracked ID, fingers brushing the embedded metal. Mercer stepped out slowly, the creak of the door slicing through the heavy air. "You dropped something that means more than you know," he said softly, his voice measured but carrying decades of restrained fire. Keller tried to mask the flicker of guilt, insisting on protocol, yet every word felt smaller under Mercer's calm gaze. The old man's composure unsettled him. No anger, only quiet disappointment, like a teacher watching a pupil fail a moral test. The wind carried the faint smell of rain as Mercer extended his hand, not for confrontation, but peace. "Respect doesn't wear a uniform," he murmured. Keller hesitated, torn between training and conscience. In that brief hesitation, something in him cracked. A buried shame stirring, whispering that maybe power meant more, when it served, not commanded. Rain began to fall, sparse at first, then heavier, a rhythm against metal and earth. Keller motioned for Mercer to stay by the truck, but his voice lacked conviction. Mercer's eyes softened as he studied the young officer, not with defiance but with empathy. "You carry too much weight," he said, almost as if reading from Keller's own heart. The officer turned away, pretending to check the license plate, but the words hit deep. His late father's face flashed in memory. Another uniform, another man who lost his way in the pursuit of respect. Keller's breath trembled. He could feel the edge of something human pressing through the armor of duty. The raindrops blurred the edges of the world, and for a fleeting moment, the silence between them felt like a bridge. One built not from words, but from shared pain neither could name. A crackle on Keller's radio shattered the fragile quiet. Dispatch requested his report, but the words refused to form. He looked at Mercer, the metal still gleaming faintly through the cracked plastic in his hand. "Why keep it there?" Keller asked, the question breaking through pride like light through storm clouds. Mercer smiled faintly. "Because people forget what's behind an ID. This way they remember, even if they don't mean to." Keller's throat tightened. He'd spent years judging faces, reading defiance into silence, yet, standing before this man, every assumption he carried felt hollow. The rain slowed, a light drizzle tracing lines of remorse down his face. "You shouldn't have to prove who you are," he said quietly. Mercer nodded. "Neither should you." Their eyes met, the beginning of a fragile understanding, born in the storm's fading light. By the time the rain stopped, the world had turned to mist. Keller stood motionless, feeling the weight of every badge he'd ever pinned to his chest. Mercer returned to his truck, pausing by the door. "You've still got time to be the kind of man your father wanted you to be," he said gently, not as judgment but grace. Keller froze. The name, his father, carried like an echo from the grave. He hadn't mentioned him, yet somehow the veteran knew. "I served with him," Mercer continued. "He was brave. Flawed, but brave." Keller swallowed hard, his voice cracking under the flood of memory. He lost himself near the end. Mercer looked at him with quiet certainty. Then find what he lost. The sound of the truck's engine rose, fading into the soft hum of redemption beginning. Keller stood there long after, the broken ID still in his hand, and for the first time his grip trembled not from anger but awakening. The next morning brought a dim stillness to the precinct. Keller sat at his desk, the cracked ID sealed in an evidence bag before him. The hum of fluorescent lights pressed against his temples, a reminder of the life he'd built on obedience rather than conviction. He couldn't shake Mercer's words. Find what he lost. Opening his computer, Keller searched the veteran's name. What he found stopped him cold. John Mercer, awarded the Medal of Valor in 1973 for rescuing a squad from ambush. Later discharged after exposing misconduct among officers overseas, the record ended abruptly. Seal. His father's name appeared in the same document. Keller's hands trembled. He realized Mercer hadn't been a stranger. He'd been part of his father's truth. As guilt turned to determination, Keller rose, eyes burning with purpose. For the first time, duty meant something more than orders. It meant making things right. Keller's footsteps echoed down the corridor toward Chief Daniels' office. The chief looked up from his desk, his expression sharp and unreadable. "Why are you digging through sealed files?" he asked flatly. Keller hesitated. "I had an encounter with John Mercer. There's something missing in his record." Daniel's lips curved into something between amusement and warning. "Leave the past buried, Keller. That man caused trouble back then. Best let old wounds rot quietly." The words tasted like rot themselves. Keller clenched his jaw. "He served with my father," he said. A flicker crossed Daniel's eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Then take my advice. Don't end up like him." Keller left the office with more questions than answers, the silence of authority pressing against his back. The seed of rebellion or redemption had begun to sprout. That evening, Keller sat in his car outside Mercer's modest house, engine off, the silence alive with unease. The porch light flickered, revealing wind chimes whispering in the cold. He hesitated before stepping out, rehearsing what to say. When Mercer opened the door, surprise softened into quiet recognition. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said. Keller held up the ID, now carefully taped together. "I need to understand," he replied. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and rain-soaked earth. Framed photos lined the mantel. Soldiers, young faces, a family lost to time. "Your father and I stood in the same mud," Mercer said. "We saw what power does when it forgets its purpose." The words struck deeper than accusation. They were an invitation to truth. Mercer poured black coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "Your father tried to do the right thing once," he said, staring into the dark liquid. "He stood up against Daniels when he covered for an officer who shot an unarmed man. The department buried it. They broke him for speaking up." Keller sat motionless, words trapped in disbelief. "He never told me." Mercer's voice was low. "Because he thought silence would protect you." The room seemed to hum with the ghosts of choices past. Keller felt something shift. A betrayal too deep for anger, too raw for forgiveness. He looked around the modest home and saw not a veteran forgotten by time, but a man who had carried justice like a torch through storms of hypocrisy. "I need to make this right," Keller whispered. "Then be ready," Mercer replied. "They'll come for you next." Keller drove back through the night, headlights slicing through fog. Every mile tightened his resolve. He stopped by the old bridge outside town, the place his father used to take him when the world seemed too heavy. Parking the car, he stepped out, the cold wind cutting his thoughts into clarity. He looked down at the ID, the metal gleaming faintly beneath its cracks. The reflection of the river shimmered like fractured truth beneath the surface. He knew the cost of stepping forward, careers, reputations, even safety, but he also knew the price of silence. The echo of Mercer's words lingered. "They'll come for you next." Keller exhaled. pocketed the ID, and walked toward his cruiser. Somewhere between fear and courage, he found the first step toward justice. The morning came cloaked in unease. Keller entered the precinct to whispers, the kind that spread like smoke through tight halls. His computer access was suddenly restricted. Files on Mercer and his father's case had vanished. Chief Daniels' office door stood closed, blinds drawn. A chill slid down Keller's spine. He knew then. Daniels had seen the search logs. As he passed the bullpen, his colleague's eyes averted. The same brotherhood that once shielded him now looked through him. His badge, once a symbol of honor, felt heavier with every step. Keller sat at his desk, pretending to type, while his thoughts roared with defiance. The system had turned on him, just as it had on Mercer, and perhaps on his father. But unlike them, he would not go quietly. Somewhere deep beneath the fear, something unyielding began to rise. Courage, forged in shame, and tempered by truth. Later that day, Keller met Emily at a quiet diner off the main road. She watched him with worry as he explained what he'd uncovered. The sealed files, the corruption, the link to his father's downfall. "Ryan?" she said softly. "You were talking about taking on the entire department." He looked down at his untouched coffee. "Someone has to." Emily reached across the table, her fingers resting over his. "Then do it the right way. Don't burn everything. Rebuild what's worth saving." Her words steadied him. The rain outside streaked down the glass, blurring the neon lights into rivers of color. For a moment, he let himself breathe. Emily's faith was fragile but pure, the kind that could either save him or be shattered by what was coming. That night, Keller returned to the precinct after hours. The halls were empty. Only the hum of servers and the ticking of a wall clock filling the air. He used an old admin password, his father's old access code, still hidden in the system, and retrieved a hidden report marked Mercer J. Incident 1973. As he opened it, a series of images flashed on screen. Soldiers, documents, classified correspondence linking Chief Daniels to falsified testimonies. His breath caught. Daniels had built his career on the lie that broke Mercer and his father. He downloaded the files onto a flash drive, heart pounding. A noise echoed behind him. Footsteps. Keller froze, closing the laptop. A shadow crossed the wall. "Working late, Keller." The voice was calm, familiar, and dangerous. Daniels stepped forward, the sound of his boots echoing in the silence. Curiosity. "Gets men killed in this line of work," he said, voice low, dangerous. Keller turned, forcing steadiness into his tone. "You buried the truth. My father tried to stop you." Daniels smirked. "Your father was weak. He didn't understand how order works. Sacrifice a few to protect the many." Keller's hand tightened on the flash drive. "You call corruption protection?" Daniels leaned closer, eyes glinting with authority's arrogance. "You'll learn, Keller. The truth doesn't keep this town safe. Fear does." For the first time, Keller saw the man clearly. Not a leader, but a coward cloaked in medals and lies. "Then maybe it's time fear changed sides," Keller said, his voice low but steady. Keller drove straight to Mercer's house, tires hissing against the wet road. When Mercer opened the door, Keller looked different. Not ashamed, not afraid, but resolved. He placed the flash drive on the table. "Everything's here," he said. "Your name, my father's, the cover-up. All of it." Mercer studied him quietly. "You know what happens when truth walks into a room full of liars?" he asked. "It doesn't leave untouched." Keller nodded. "I'm done being untouched." The two men stood in silence, soldier and officer, bound by a promise to justice neither could ignore. Outside, the rain eased into mist, the dawn's first light hinting through gray clouds. "Then let's finish what they started," Mercer said, eyes fierce with purpose. Keller nodded. And for the first time, they were no longer divided by age, rank, or regret, but joined by the same vow. to make the truth seen. Morning broke with a quiet tension, the kind that hummed beneath the surface before the storm. Keller sat in his car outside the local news station, watching reporters hurry through glass doors with cups of coffee and crumpled scripts. The flash drive in his hand felt like both salvation and suicide. Mercer sat beside him, silent, eyes fixed on the rising sun bleeding through the clouds. "You sure about this?" Keller asked. Mercer's lips tightened. "Truth doesn't wait for comfort." Keller nodded. He stepped out, walking toward the entrance, every step echoing louder than his heartbeat. Inside, he met a young journalist willing to listen. A woman named Donna, who saw the conviction in his eyes before hearing a word. As he handed her the drive, Keller knew the instant the files went public, his badge would be worth nothing but metal. Yet somehow, it finally felt like honor. By noon, the first wave hit. The precinct was buzzing. Screens flashing with headlines. Decorated veteran wrongfully disgraced. Evidence points to police cover-up. Keller's name was attached as the source. Daniels stormed through the bullpen, fury radiating off him. "Find Keller. Bring him in," he barked. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, loyalty clashing with conscience. Keller watched from his car parked across the street, his pulse steady but heavy. Mercer sat beside him, silent as ever, hands resting on his cane. "They'll come after both of us now," Keller said. Mercer's faint smile broke the tension. "Good. Then they'll finally be looking at something that matters." The sirens began in the distance, not in pursuit of criminals, but of truth itself. Keller started the engine. "Let's make them chase it." Keller's apartment was ransacked when he returned. Drawers overturned, papers scattered, his service weapon missing. A message was carved into the wood of his table. Silence or sacrifice. He stared at it for a long time, anger pulsing under control. Mercer stood in the doorway, surveying the wreckage with weary familiarity. "They did this to me once," he said quietly. "They think fear rewrites memory." Keller looked at him. "They're wrong." He picked up the splintered remains of a photo, his father in uniform, smiling beside a younger Daniels. "They broke him," Keller whispered. Mercer's gaze hardened. "Then make sure they remember his name for how he was before they did." The air seemed to thicken. Not with despair, but the stillness before retaliation. That night, Keller met Emily at a secluded park where the sound of crickets masked their words. She'd seen the broadcast. "They're calling you a traitor," she said, voice trembling between fear and admiration. Keller's eyes softened. "Then maybe I'm finally doing something right." She handed him a folded letter, a copy of his father's final report, one she'd found archived through a friend in the courthouse. "He never stopped fighting," she whispered. Keller read the faded signature at the bottom, his father's handwriting strong and unbroken. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed tears into the corners of his eyes. Emily stepped closer, touching his arm. "Promise me you'll survive this." Keller smiled faintly. "Only if the truth does." By dawn, Keller and Mercer were ready. They stood on the steps of the courthouse, the air thick with cameras, reporters, and tension. Keller's uniform was gone, replaced by a plain jacket and a look of quiet defiance. Mercer stood beside him, cane in hand, his medal of valor pinned to his chest for the first time in decades. "You sure you want to do this?" Keller asked. Mercer nodded. "They took everything I had once. Now I'm giving them what's left. The truth." The courthouse doors opened as the press surged forward. Keller began to speak, his voice steady and unyielding, recounting the corruption, the cover-ups, the names. Mercer watched him, pride and sorrow blending in his eyes. For a moment, the wind caught the American flag above them. Frayed, but still standing, much like the men beneath it. The broadcast spread faster than Keller expected. By afternoon, every channel carried fragments of the story. Corruption, buried files, veterans betrayed. But truth, once released, doesn't just free. It threatens. The department issued a statement denying everything, branding Keller a rogue officer under investigation for misconduct. His face appeared on screens beside words like disgraced and traitor. Keller watched from Mercer's living room as the headlines scrolled, the noise of the TV filling the silence between them. "They're twisting it," Keller muttered. Mercer didn't look away from the screen. They always do before they break. Outside, reporters began gathering near the driveway, their flashes slicing through the blinds. Keller's phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Stop, or you won't get another sunrise." He turned the phone off, meeting Mercer's calm eyes. "Looks like they're scared," Keller said quietly. Mercer smiled faintly. "Then we're close." That night, Keller stepped outside to clear his head. The street was too quiet, the air heavy with threat. A dark SUV idled at the corner, lights off. He felt the instinctive chill of a hunter being watched. Before he could react, the sound of tires scraping gravel broke the silence. The SUV pulled away, leaving only exhaust in the mist. Mercer appeared at the doorway, cane in hand. "They're testing you," he said. "They won't shoot yet. They want fear to do the work." Keller looked toward the disappearing taillights. "Then they'll be disappointed." Mercer nodded, eyes hardening. "Good, because when they finally come, you'll be ready." Keller looked up at the old man, realizing for the first time that Mercer wasn't just surviving. He was leading him into a war fought long before Keller was born. By morning, Mercer was gone. Keller found the back door ajar, footprints in the dew leading toward the woods behind the house. Panic struck fast, followed by focus. He followed the trail to a small clearing. Mercer's cane lay on the ground beside a folded note. Keller unfolded it with shaking hands. "They took me. Don't come alone. Bring the truth." His pulse thundered. He raced back to the car, starting the engine with trembling urgency. The flash drive felt heavier in his pocket than any weapon. He called Emily. "They have him," he said, voice taut. "Ryan, don't do this alone," she pleaded. "I'm not," he replied, eyes narrowing at the road ahead. "He's with me." The engine roared into the rising dawn as the fight for one man's honor became the battle for all their soul. Keller followed the clues to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the same place where his father's final confrontation had taken place decades earlier. Inside, shadows stretched long under broken skylights. The sound of dripping water echoed like a heartbeat. Daniels waited in the center, flanked by two officers in plain clothes. Mercer sat restrained to a chair, bruised but unbroken. "Let him go," Keller demanded. Daniels smirked. "You should have learned from your father. This is what truth costs." Keller held up the flash drive. "Not this time." Daniels nodded toward his men. "Take him." In a blur of motion, Keller moved. One strike, one disarm, his training colliding with desperation. Mercer shouted, "Finish it!" The chaos froze for a heartbeat, truth and violence sharing the same breath. The fight erupted fast and brutal, a blur of fists, boots, and rage. Keller overpowered one guard, sending him sprawling into a rusted beam. The other lunged, and Mercer, despite his restraints, kicked his chair forward, toppling the man. Keller broke free of a chokehold, slamming Daniels against the wall. "You destroyed my father," he hissed. Daniels' face twisted with fury. "Your father destroyed himself." Keller lifted the flash drive. "No, you did." He tossed it toward Mercer, who caught it despite bleeding hands. "Get it out!" Keller shouted. As Daniels lunged again, Keller swung his baton, cracking it across the chief's arm. The weapon clattered to the floor. Sirens wailed outside. Emily had called for backup. For the first time, Daniels looked afraid. Keller stood over him, breath ragged. "It's over." The warehouse echoed with the fading wail of sirens as officers flooded in, weapons raised, confusion, spilling into the chaos. Keller stood with his hands raised, not in surrender, but in relief. Mercer sat against the wall, breathing shallowly yet alive, the flash drive secure in his grip. Daniels was dragged to his feet, shouting orders that no one obeyed anymore. The younger officers hesitated. The old authority had cracked. Keller's voice cut through the noise. "He's been lying to all of you. The files are public now." Mercer managed a weak smile. "You did it." For the first time, Keller felt no weight in his chest, only clarity. The kind that comes after a storm, clear as the sky. As Daniels was led away, eyes blazing with humiliation, Keller turned to Mercer. "It's over." Mercer shook his head faintly. "No, son, it's only beginning. Truth doesn't rest, it echoes." Hours later, the precinct was unrecognizable. Daniel's office stood empty, his nameplate removed, files seized. Keller sat alone in the interview room, hands cuffed, but eyes steady. Across from him sat internal affairs officers, their questions sharp, but voices subdued. "Why go public instead of through channels?" one asked. Keller answered without hesitation. "Because the channels are what buried the truth in the first place." The silence that followed carried weight. Outside the glass, Emily watched, her hands clasped tightly together. She had seen his face on every screen, not as a villain, not yet as a hero, but as a man who chose conscience over comfort. The officers finally stood, exchanging looks. "You will be suspended pending review," one said quietly. Keller nodded. "As long as it's written, I can live with that." Outside the courthouse steps days later, the crowd had doubled. Reporters, veterans, townspeople holding signs demanding reform. Keller walked out with Mercer beside him, both men weathered but unbroken. Cameras flashed as questions flew like arrows. "Are you afraid for your safety? What happens now?" Keller stopped, facing the crowd. "If telling the truth costs us peace, then maybe we were never safe to begin with." The murmurs hushed. Mercer placed a hand on his shoulder, the medal of valor gleaming against his chest. "You gave my brothers their name back," he said quietly. Keller looked toward the sky where sunlight cut through storm clouds. For the first time, he felt his father's memory, not as a wound, but as a light, steady, guiding, redeemed. That evening, Keller visited the small bridge outside town, the one where his father used to bring him as a boy. The wind carried the scent of rain, and the water below shimmered with twilight hues. He pulled from his pocket the cracked ID and the medal, now restored. For a long moment, he just stared at them, symbols of two men who'd chosen the same path decades apart. Emily joined him silently, her hand finding his. "They cleared your record," she whispered. "You're free." Keller smiled faintly. "No one's ever free, not if we stop caring." He placed the ID on the bridge railing, letting the wind lift the loose edges. It fluttered once, then settled, gleaming softly under the fading light. Night fell gently over the town that once buried its truth. Inside Mercer's modest home, Keller sat across from him by the fire. The room glowed in warm light, filled with quiet gratitude. "What happens to you now?" Keller asked. Mercer smiled, gaze distant but peaceful. "Maybe I'll finally sleep," Keller chuckled softly. "You earned it." Mercer studied him for a long moment. "So did you, son." The words carried more weight than any medal. As the fire crackled, Keller looked at the framed photograph of his father and Mercer from decades ago. Two soldiers frozen in time, one truth finally unburied. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. No longer a warning, but a benediction. The storm had passed. What remained was justice. Quiet, enduring, and human. A month later, the town breathed differently. The courthouse now bore a new plaque, in honor of integrity above authority. Keller stood before it during the dedication ceremony, his uniform restored, his eyes searching the crowd. Emily smiled from the front row, pride tempered by relief. Reporters whispered, but the noise faded when the mayor invited Keller to speak. He stepped to the podium, voice low yet steady. "Justice isn't about punishment," he said. "It's about memory, what we choose to carry forward." The applause was gentle, not thunderous, real. In the back, Mercer watched, cane in hand, the faintest smile tracing his lips. For the first time in years, the man who had been silenced was witnessing truth spoken aloud. After the ceremony, Keller helped Mercer to the memorial garden behind the courthouse. Veterans stood in quiet clusters, the hum of conversation mingling with rustling leaves. Keller knelt beside a new granite slab etched with the names of those who had once been erased. "Your name belongs here," Keller said. Mercer's fingers brushed the engraved letters. "John Mercer, 1973. Valor restored." His voice was soft. "Took half a lifetime, but it's enough." Keller nodded, emotion tight in his chest. "You taught me what a badge is for." Mercer looked up, the sunlight catching his eyes. "Then wear it like it's borrowed from every man who earned it before you." Weeks later, Keller visited the police academy to speak to recruits. The classroom smelled of new leather and chalk, the same scent he'd once known as arrogance, now reborn as purpose. He told them about truth, not cases. About how silence corrodes faster than rust. "Your badge is only as clean as your conscience," he said. Some recruits nodded. Others just listened, uneasy yet awakened. When he finished, a quiet cadet raised her hand. "Sir, what if the truth costs us everything?" Keller smiled faintly. "Then it's the only thing worth paying for." He left them with that. No medals, no warnings. Just a seed of courage planted in new soil. One quiet evening, Keller found himself back at Mercer's porch. The old man sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the horizon turn to bronze. "Doctors say I've got a few months," Mercer said simply. Keller sat beside him without a word. They watched a pair of kids cycle down the street, laughter echoing. "If they ask who I was," Mercer said, "tell them I kept standing." Keller's throat tightened. "You'll tell them yourself." Mercer chuckled softly. "Maybe in another story." The silence between them was full, not empty. An earned silence. As the sun dipped, Keller reached into his pocket and set the restored ID beside Mercer. "Thought you might want this back." Mercer smiled, eyes glassy with peace. "No, son, you keep it. Remind them what it means." Months later, a quiet funeral filled the town's veteran cemetery. Flags fluttered, the air still except for the distant call of a bugle. Keller stood beside the coffin draped in the American flag, his hand steady on its edge. Emily stood behind him, silent, support in her eyes. When the honor guard fired the final salute, Keller whispered, "Rest easy, old soldier. The truth's awake now." As the crowd dispersed, he remained alone a moment longer. The wind lifted across the field, carrying the sound of metals clinking softly. A promise kept. Keller turned toward the rising sun, the faint gleam of Mercer's eyes shining from his pocket. Justice had not been perfect, but it had been real, and for men like them, that was enough.